we're going to start with the second part of the opening session, and it's basically food system stock taking. Where do we stand 2 years later? We will not start again. You know that we all convened 2 years ago to commit to food system transformation in Africa. The first global stock take took place 6 weeks ago in Rome and brought leaders, ministers, stakeholders, civil society in Rome to discuss 2 years later, after committing to transforming food system, where do we stand? We don't want to come here every year and hear about potential, the potential of Africa. We have the youngest population in the world. The median age is 20 years old. We have 65% of uncultivated arable land. We have solution, we have technology, we have research to make hunger, poverty, malnutrition, climate disaster a story of the past. But the theme is recover, regenerate, and act. So, as I said, I don't want to come here every year, meet you, and discuss the potential we have. Because when the potential never materializes, it becomes an issue. So in this session, we are going to discuss what have we done 2 years later. And we will have two distinguished speakers to frame the discussion. Let me call first Mr. Lawrence Haddad to the stage. And many of you know him. He's the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. He's also a renowned thought leader on nutrition and also the World Food Prize winner. So I think you have exactly the right person to start framing the discussion. Lawrence, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadine, and it's great to be back here. The question that Femi asked the previous panel was a great question, and she asked us, why are you here? So my answer to that question is, this is the place I learn the most every year. This is the place I learn the most, and this is the place where I feel like there's the biggest openness to learning and sharing amongst the participants. So this is where my heart gets lifted up the most every year. So I'm delighted to be back here. The task I was given in a few brief minutes was to make some points about critical parameters for food system transformation. So I have 7 very quick points. So the first thing is to prioritize goals. We know that food systems can do lots of things. They can reduce hunger, reduce malnutrition, improve resilience, accelerate climate action, promote biodiversity, generate jobs, reduce poverty. But it's difficult to do all of these things at the same time. So a government will have to, and a business, and an organization such as GAIN, we have to prioritize what we're going to be doing first. That's very important. Not loud enough. Second, thank you, Nadine, always taking care of me. Second, know your food systems. Is that better? Yes? Second, know your food systems. If I was a policymaker in Africa or anywhere, and I was tasked with developing and transforming my food system, I would be in a panic because I would say, what does my food system look like? And if I need to find out what my food system looks like, I have to go to 30 different sources of data. So we need to develop platforms that bring all food system data together to make it really easy to describe and diagnose a country's food system. GAIN and FAO and others are working on a food system dashboard, and I encourage you to look at that. The third thing, know your resources. I bet you don't know, ministers, how much your government spends on your food system. I bet you, MDs and CEOs, you don't know how much your company spends on food systems. That's because budgets are not constructed around food systems until now. We have the 3FS initiative, led by IFAD and the World Bank and others, which is a tool for mapping what you spend and where you spend it, which sectors, which regions, which objectives are being promoted by your current spend. That'll help you figure out where the gaps are and where maybe you're over-investing. I am a big believer in the fact that there's a lot of resources in the food system, but they're just pointing in the wrong direction or they're misallocated. Fourth, develop a plan. Food systems are complex, lots of moving parts, lots of stakeholders. As Omid said in the previous session, strategies and plans aren't everything, but developing a strategy and a plan will help you think through the issues that you need to help through. And I note from the Stocktake in Rome a couple of months ago, 37 African countries have a plan, which is fantastic. But that also means that 18 do not. And if you don't have a plan, I think it's really challenging to transform your food system. Fifth, align policies. When you work across sectors, it's really easy to develop a policy that's fantastic for hunger reduction, but is terrible for environmental protection. Or you develop a program that is great for income generation, but terrible for resilience. Or you develop something that's good for nutrition improvement, but is not so good for the environment. If you don't have a way of assessing the coherence of your policies, you're going to be in trouble. And again, I know Academia 2063 is doing some really interesting work on developing a policy coherence tool. 6, develop an ecosystem of support. Governments are obviously key. They set the tone, as Agnes Kalabata said 2 years ago in the Food System Summit. They set the tone, but they can't do everything by themselves. They need an ecosystem of support internally and externally. But we in the ecosystem, we have to make sure this ecosystem is not one of cacophony, but one of symphony. It's not chaotic, but it is coherent. It is not individualistic, but it is collective. And that's a challenge to every one of us in the room. If you are here and you say you support a government, then you better be working with other people who say the same thing. And finally, we need to assess progress. If you don't assess progress, you're flying blind. If you don't assess progress, how can we take anything you say seriously? There isn't a mechanism for assessing progress in food system transformation yet, but there are a number of important initiatives. One of them is you'll see in the State of African Food System report that will be released later today. You'll see it. It's called the Countdown Initiative. It's got 50 indicators that I think are a good starting point for any government who wants to assess its food system. But more important than that, we can't wait for 5 years to see if our food system transformation is working on environment or health or food or nutrition or jobs. We need some progress indicators. We need to see our policies being changed, our resource allocations being changed, our institutions being changed, is data being used. So colleagues, the good news is from this Countdown initiative, which you see in the report, is that compared to global averages, Africa is doing better or the same in half of those 50 indicators. So I want to echo what John said this morning. It's not all doom and gloom. There's some areas where the rest of the world can look to Africa and learn from Africa. So with that, Nadine, thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. And he started enlightening you on the critical parameters for the food system transformation in the region. I want to call on a renowned also expert from the region, Dr. Jean-Jacques Mohinda, Regional Head of East Africa AGRA. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Nadine, for the opportunity, and good morning, everyone. So let me pick up from where the previous speaker has just stopped, and actually agree that we're during this conference discussing Africa's food systems transformation in a global challenging situation. And I tend to agree with John that there are actually solutions. In fact, African agricultural transformation and food systems transformation journey in the recent years has been slowed down by multiple shocks, all the way from COVID-19, climate change, and the conflict in Eastern Europe. If you look at some of the critical CAADP-Malabo commitment, for instance, on reducing hunger, on accelerating investment, and even poverty eradication. Just to use a few facts and share a few ideas for the next panel to consider, we now have evidence showing that African agricultural productivity growth has been reduced by close to 34% in the last 50 years due to climate change. We also have emerging data and statistics showing that our continent now is home to 1/3 of people facing hunger, if you look at the numbers globally. And the population from this continent that is going to be affected by different climate change hazards in 2050 is going to be close to 1 billion under the 2 degrees Celsius warming scenario. Another probably important statistic, and John mentioned briefly on this, is the reliance on import on some of the food commodities. And if you look at the current statistics and the numbers we have, we're spending nearly 34 billion on 4 agricultural commodities that can be grown in existing food baskets and agroecological zones in the continent, such as wheat, maize, rice, and soybean. And this is a continent where we're still importing close to 90% of fertilizers, spending another close to $5 billion annually on imported fertilizers. And all of this is being worsened by declining development flows in the agricultural sector. If you compare numbers from 2021 and 2022, when we had the COVID-19 outbreak. Now, I want to share a few ideas for the next panel to consider. Number one, if you have to accelerate implementation for the remaining 2 years to the end of the CAADP-Malabo in 2025, we need as a continent an integrated plan that brings together investment that promote agricultural productivity, that support infrastructure development for production, for marketing, for value addition, but also investment in climate resilient practices. Number two, we cannot accelerate implementation if we keep implementing in isolation. So I'm proposing the panel to take into consideration the idea of integrating existing continental framework, CAADP, the African Continental Free Trade Area that was mentioned earlier, the Program for Infrastructure Development, the Science and Technology Strategy for Africa known as TISA, including even the framework on AU data policy that can help us tracking like the previous speaker has been mentioning. And all of this in the context of the Africans Agenda 2023, but also the SDGs by 2030. Good enough. The African Common Position Paper on food systems brings all these frameworks together and outlines key priorities and ambition with the expected impact to actually achieve a 1 trillion food industry that provides not only sufficient nutritious food, but also enhances supply chain infrastructure and also creates work opportunities for youth, especially for young women. My last point for the panel to consider is on rethinking the governance of the future African food systems. Today, we cannot continue shying away against some of the emerging trends. For instance, integrating the cutting-edge technologies. We have been hearing about the artificial intelligence, digital technologies, blockchains, e-commerce, and many others. Number two, an integrated plan has also to take into consideration the age, the generational, and the gender employment gaps that exist in the continent today. Of course, taking into consideration food systems approach, but also climate change shocks, water, and land degradation. Number three, it has been already mentioned that this is a continent that is home to the world's largest, youngest, and fastest growing population. One of the speakers mentioned about the population doubling to 2.5 billion in 2050. So there is also emerging evidence that by 2040, before 2050, this continent is going to be home to 12 cities that have more than 10 million each. By that time, we'll also have another 19 cities that have between 5 to 10 million population each. This is a huge market, and it is also a huge opportunity. Last point, moving forward, I also believe that the continent will require governance and institutional innovations for its food systems. And this entails actually driving equitable, inclusive policy processes and also program delivery. And lastly, this will also entail providing coordination at local level, national level, regional level, to leverage on existing food systems locally, but also local markets and the local innovation. These are a few ideas for your panel to consider, Nadine, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. I'm back. So you have heard from the first panel where we stand in terms of potential, in terms of solutions, in terms of now the two speakers we had, critical parameters to make a difference. The second part of this session, we are going to listen to government, to listen to the farmers, listen also to development partners of where do we stand today, 2 years, as I said, after the Food Systems Summit in the Africa region. It is time to take stock, to discuss how we are progressing, because as I said before, we have the potential. We heard this morning and before, we have the solutions. And we came here because we are committed to act. So let's hear about action. I would like to invite to this panel, number one, the Honorable Minister of Agriculture of the Republic of Malawi. Honorable Minister Sam Kawale, please come to the stage. I would also like to welcome the Honorable Minister of Livestock and Fisheries from the United Republic of Tanzania. Do I see them? Okay. Meanwhile, I will invite the President of the East African Farmer Association, Director of the Pan-Africa Farmers Organization, and Director of Africa World Leaders Farmers Organization, a lot of titles, Mrs. Elizabeth Simadala. Please come to the stage. Finally, I would like to welcome Mrs. Sylvia Ekra, Deputy Director of the Food System Coordination Hub. Please don't be shy. I think they all deserve a round of applause for coming to the stage. Excellency, please come closer. Good morning. I'm missing one minister, but I think we are good enough to start talking. We are discussing action, Excellency. We would like to know, where do you stand in Tanzania in making progress towards food system transformation? Are you making progress? Are you seeing change? Progress in food system transformation. Where do you stand? Are you making progress? Can you tell us today?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. If I take it well from the question that you asked, how do we take it in Tanzania when we talk of transformation, agriculture transformation? Is it? Am I right? Yeah, thank you. So, to answer this question is in Tanzania, we are looking for women and youth inclusiveness. This is number one. And this is the main agenda that championed by our government, led by Her Excellency Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan. Because we want to increase productivity, and this makes the consumption for a domestic, and again the excess to sell it for export. But second, we're looking for financing. Talking of the transformation of the agricultural sector, that is crops, livestock, fisheries, we are heavily looking after access to financing. To start with, government, we are doing better, increasing the financing by our budget about 4 times in both crop sector, livestock and fisheries. And the third, talking of the transformation, we're doing together with the private sector the digitalization and the innovation of the agriculture sector. And as you see, we talk of youths and women inclusiveness. Then to attract more youths, we must do a digital innovations and the technology. But fourth, due to the climate change issues, then we look after the adaptations and mitigation measures, especially for improving the irrigations. And now we do more in irrigation schemes. But again, even in the livestock sector, we talk of forages, production, and actually we start looking at how we can do irrigation even in the production of forages for livestock keepers, for more beef and milk production. So, as you know, back to the nutrition issues, we mainly look after producing more protein, the animal proteins, to sufficiently make it enough for our local consumption, but again for our export as well, as we are exporters of fish and fishery products, but again we are exporters of beef in different parts of the world. So thank you, and we look after more investing, and we're ready. Actually, we have put aside places, we have land in good places to invest, and our doors are open for the world to come and invest with us, so to feed the world. Thank you.
Honorable Minister, thank you for that. Elizabeth, you've heard from the Minister. They're increasing the budget, investing in digitalization, paying attention to women and youth, modernizing agriculture, working on adaptation, mitigation, irrigation. You represent the farmers. Do you see the change? Do you see things in motion? Does it reach you? tell us.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nadine. Distinguished Excellencies, I bring you greetings from the farmers of Eastern Africa, and also the global farmers under the World Farmers Organization. Listening from the Minister, I'm happy that there is a change. The fact that 2021, we were discussing the UN food system. In July, we were discussing the stocktaking and having all the government representatives and other stakeholders, reporting on what has been achieved for the last 2 years. And also listening from the Minister, and the fact that today we are here under the Africa Food Systems Forum, it means there is change. But also from the farmers' perspective, we are seeing great recognition of farmers as change agents and also as solutions to food systems. But we need to go beyond this. We need to go beyond what I would call intentional to practical actions. Most of what we are seeing is intentional, is good intentions of having the farmers in discussions, bringing them on the table. But when it comes to practical actions, we are talking of the budget. The minister is talking about the budget. But how much of this budget is going to the farmers' organizations? I'm happy for Tanzania, at least there is some funds that have been dedicated to some of the farmers' organizations here, including the Agricultural Council of Tanzania. But we have so many other farmers' organizations, for example, here. Are they also benefiting from this budget? But also, a case of Tanzania is one of those, maybe several other countries. How many of our other countries are having a dedicated budget for the farmers' organizations? I think this is what is lacking, and we need to see that shift from, just having farmers and using them as political conduits to moving into real actions where we are looked at as partners, as equal partners to benefit from the food systems.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Excellency, Minister, I won't have time to come back to you, but Elizabeth has challenged you a bit to say it's good intention, very good intention, but how much of it is reaching the farmers? But before I come back to you, let me go to Sylvia. Sylvia, the hub, Africa is a priority region. Since the food system stocktake, what are your priorities to support Africa in achieving food system transformation?
Thank you very much, Nadine. Good morning to all. It's great to be here for my second AGRF, and it's great to see so many of you who were with us in Rome for the UNFSS+2 stock-taking moment. And before I talk about the priorities, I want to take a moment for all of us to reflect about Africa's participation at the UNFSS+2. We had in total 3,300 participants, and out of those, 2,000 were government delegates. Out of those 2,000 government delegates, 600 were from Africa. We had 14 heads of states and governments and vice heads of states and governments from Africa in Rome. 43 countries were there, 42 ministers, and not only agriculture ministers were there. And I think there is a message in this massive participation of Africa into the stock-taking moment. And I hope, and I believe that that message is that our decision makers have really embraced and understood and acknowledged the transformational power of food systems transformation, not only for the agriculture sector, but for the future and the prosperity of the continent. And I think they were very loud and clear in Rome about their messages. They spoke about resilience, they spoke about food security, they spoke about the need to address the climate change threats, the finance, and all these other issues that we're going to discuss throughout the week. So that's the first point that I wanted to make. I think in terms of the political will, the commitment is there. Now, are we transforming this, as Nadine has been challenging us to discuss? And I think this whole process of the stocktake has given us a lot of insight into what has happened in our respective countries in the past 2 years. 30 countries from Africa have submitted voluntary reports to the hub. And thanks to those voluntary reports, we have better insight into what has worked and maybe what has not worked so well. And I think in terms of what has been working, that we need to amplify and really scale up, is the issue of mainstreaming food systems transformation into national development plans. And it was Lawrence who was talking about managing the trade-offs. What we are doing in one area can be unraveled in another area if we're not careful. And the only way to really identify those issues is to be discussing food systems in a holistic way when we are discussing national development. And we've seen progress with countries doing that. We've also seen progress with governance and setting up governance structures for food systems transformation that are multi-sectorial, multi-level as well, because we need the subnational level to be engaged. We need to really ground these transformation efforts into the local level. But from the words of the countries themselves, they've not done so well in engaging with the youth. And all the speakers before us this morning have been talking about the youth. And our lead researcher for the report that was presented to us just earlier mentioned very clearly that we have this demographic dividend that we can transform into potential for the region. It could become a ticking bomb if we do not channel the energies of our youth constructively. And I think food systems is really one area where we can mobilize our youth. Now, that gives me a transition to what has not been done. And I think that is the unfinished business that we have to be looking at. And interestingly and luckily, it's very much aligned with the recommendations that we've heard from Professor and also from Jean-Jacques. The trade, almost all African countries have a lot of expectations and mentioned about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. This is our chance to expand markets. This is our chance to consolidate regional and regional supply and value chains. But we need infrastructure, which continues to be a big gap. Another area that we need to consolidate around is science, technology, and innovation. We heard about it before. And many African countries talk about the divide there in their reporting and the access that is still limited to farmers and rural areas. So we need to be looking at that. But we should not forget also that when we're talking about innovation, doesn't mean that we have to leave behind the traditional knowledge and the local knowledge. I think it's very important to tap into that. Finance, and I'm talking under the control of our lead finance person in IFAD, who's been working with the hub, doing a fantastic job with the World Bank to give tools to countries and empower them in understanding where is the money going to for food systems transformation. And I think the question about budget is also related to that. So going forward, the hub will continue to work with countries, with the national food systems conveners. We are supporting several countries, including Tanzania and others. We want to make sure that the ecosystem of support can work effectively with the national conveners. It was Lawrence again talking about fragmentation. We cannot continue to have this disjointed assistance and support to the countries. I think dialogues have to continue. Important milestones are coming our way with the SDG Summit, but also with the COP28. 2025 is going to be a very important milestone for all of us. This is the horizon. We're going to be in the post-Malabo phase. We are also going to have the second stocktaking moment, UNFSS +4. And I hope that when we come back, we're not talking about implementation gaps. We're not talking about how we're materializing intentions, and that we are really looking at impact. Thank you, Nadine.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, Honorable Minister. Thank you, Elizabeth. This is just a teaser of what's going to happen in the next 2 days. We will not go further because they're already signaling me that we are late for time. But I think you heard from the speakers this morning, there's commitment, there's solution, there's potential in the region. It's about action, and Elizabeth told us this action that you started, Mr. Minister, must reach the people. So let's make sure that the potential becomes a reality. Thank you, everybody. Femi, over to you.